Graham, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Nice to see you again.
I know, nice to see you. It's been a while. Definitely been a while.
It has actually. I was at Indie 88 not so long ago, but you weren't at your desk.
I know. But you got to talk to Adam. And so I did get a little scoop on the record, but I'm excited to go track by track through the whole new album. We're going to play it in its entirety, release day weekend, Saturday and Sunday.
That's amazing. Thank you for that.
So hopefully we can get some scoop as to, just more context on the songs, and we're going to play the whole thing.
Well, it's a good exercise for me to be able to make up stories that are more interesting than the actual stories. So
this is I don't know. It seems like it's quite an interesting record. I mean, I'm a big fan, and also, congratulations. How do you feel getting this out there to your fans?
It feels great. I mean, we spoke as I was sort of releasing the last record, and I'm glad to say that the feeling hasn't changed. That it never becomes old hat. It's always this feeling of I don't know. It's a mix of trepidation and excitement and nerves. Just how are people going to receive it into their lives, and are they going to feel as strongly about it as you hope they do, and as you do yourself. So you get to this point where you just can't hold it in anymore, or you can't sit on the egg anymore and wait for it to hatch. So we're definitely at that point.
No, it's interesting. So we're going to start everything off with track one, The Ballad of Ben Blank. And of course, you're going to be asked this over and over and over again. So should we start with who is Ben Blank, or why? Why Ben Blank?
I think both. That's actually maybe a good way of putting it. It's sort of why the need to have this character. And I think I'm starting to see Ben Blank as an avatar almost, somebody that you can sort of send out into the world to do some of the heavy lifting that life throws your way. And I don't want to say that we're not made of strong enough stuff to go out and deal with the things that we have to deal with, but it definitely feels that it's nice to sort of have somebody else to be able to throw out there to either live vicariously through, or to sort of filter your own experiences through, your own emotions, your own sort of your fears, everything, and sort of put it in this place or through the lens of this character, it just to create a little bit of a buffer so that you can maybe process a little bit more easily.
So when did Ben Blank come into your world?
Well, it started do you remember when Garth Brooks had that wild side project called Cascades back in the 1990s? And I was working at this record store in Montreal at the time, and the Cascades record, and I was like, wait a second, that's like, it's because Garth Brooks was huge, it was huge at that time. And but all of a sudden he's got like this kind of dark eyeshadow on and this kind of like indie sweep in his hair, and he's clearly tried to. So I was like, wow, what would it feel like to sort of create a persona and put music out into the world and not have anybody know it was you, and just start over again and see how people sort of how would they listen to you? Like, do people listen to my songs with this sort of preconceived idea of what my songs represent? And what would it be like if I just sort of not masked my voice necessarily, but went out there as this sort of blank slate and started releasing music? I never did that because as I tried to sort of bring that project to life, I realized that songwriting is just too personal for me, and that to sort of mask it as somebody else, as some other character or persona, I wasn't able to access what I need to in order to write a song from start to finish. But the idea stuck with me, and the idea being that this idea of renewal, and this no matter what point in your life you find yourself at, that you always have this opportunity to wipe the slate clean. Maybe not entirely, as Ben Blank does in the first song. Maybe this is a sort of segue into what this first song is about, but it's literally about sort of, you establish who you are, and then in this world, and then one day you just decide that you're going to leave it all. In his case, metaphorically speaking, left his name in the river, and then you walk off into this future as more of a question mark than this sort of box full of history and answers.
All right, well, let's get started. Let's get to song one off the new Sam Roberts Band record, The Adventures of Ben Blank. Here it is on, well, it's the Ballad of Ben Blank, starting everything off.
That's right.
The adventures begin with the ballad.
Exactly. They have to start somewhere.
Now we're on to I Dream of You. So again, I'm not a musician, but I have a lot of nerdy notes. So I hope that you.
I hope you do. That's like, because
there's like a little, it's like, is this not to dream a little dream of you? Is there a little Everly Brothers nod in here? Is there? And I guess there's this resonating guitar that makes it so dreamy. I was kind of curious, did the sonics come first, that dreamy tone, and then the lyrics, or how did this begin?
It started with a guitar riff, like this sort of, very familiar sounding kind of country, because the whole record had has a sort of country-ish slant to it, because I wanted Ben Blank to come across as, and maybe this is sort of living another way to live out a fantasy. It's sort of as this kind of cosmic cowboy voyager, out there in this landscape of love and heartache and and dreams, and so that the sort of kind of plucky guitar line quickly kind of lent itself. I was like, well, the experiment here is like, what if we can take that guitar line and turn it into, and to create this sort of dreamscape behind the whole thing. And I love that in other people's songwriting too, is that when they take two seemingly separate things and then they superimpose them on top of each other, and all of a sudden you get something that feels new to me anyway. And one of the bands that I love very much and has been sort of highly influential on myself and my bandmates is a band called Spiritualized from the UK. And they put out this record in, I think it was 1991, called Laser Guided Melodies. And it's just this amazing these amazing juxtapositions of, like, they'll take sort of gospel songs, but then create like this almost psychedelic backdrop to all of them. So I was like, well, what if I did the same thing with a kind of classic rootsy country twangy guitar, but then try to turn it into a dreamscape, somewhere for Ben Blank to go and plant the seeds of what he's looking for.
I mean, there's the lyric too. She said, love can feel like a heavy load, but love can take you heaven high. What gem of a line, but there's that heft for sure.
Well, I think when you and I talked a couple of years ago, and this is a sort of continuation in a sense, in terms of where I'm at writing songs, and I suppose where I'm at in terms of living a life too. It's sort of, there are these acknowledgments about certain truths that you have to make, and they become, it's not that they're easier to deal with, but they become more familiar, and admitting that love is not just a sort of unidirectional thing that we experience. That might have been more difficult for me to say 10 years ago, but now it seems like it's I don't want to say it's a truth that I'm more comfortable with, but it's definitely a truth that I can't turn a blind eye to. And these are the kinds of things that I think are littered throughout this record, and hopefully every record that I make from this point on.
Do you think that's something that it's time and age and life, but is it also through the filter of Ben Blank that you were able to kind of come to this point?
Well, this is the thing. It's like, it's totally, and I think about this too. It's like, am I shying away from saying what I really feel by having this sort of, by saying it through a character? And I feel like the more closely aligned I feel to this idea of Ben Blank, the more truthful this record starts to feel. And that's, again, I think part of it too is admission of something is a very difficult thing, no matter what stage of your life. Once you've said it, you can live it, but it's hard to say it the first time. And yeah, that's not a process that I'm quite through with yet, clearly. So,
well, let's get to it.
And there are chains that are hard to escape. This trouble put you in the ground. And there's a light that shines deep inside, a fire you can't do without. And every night when I close my eyes, I'm gonna dream of you, no doubt.
So song 3 is Projection.
Mhm.
And in the press material, there's this real existential breakdown. I'm not sure, I mean, sure you read it, but the middle-aged artist dilemma. I know we kind of touched on that. But how does one reconcile the fact that you finally know yourself with the fact that, well, the planet is effing dying?
Mhm.
That's in the press material. And I was like, okay, that we got that.
That was great. That's a friend of ours. His name's Richard Poplack, and he's a writer. He's a journalist. And one thing I love when it comes to press releases is sort of, and it can be a dangerous game too, because you're never quite sure what the other person's going to say. It's sort of like when you give your album to someone, you say, okay, can you draw an album cover for me? It's like, what do you hear in this, or what do you see in this rather? And that's what Rich came back with in terms of what that song meant to. And I was like, wow, that's a heavy statement. And then we have to decide whether that's a statement that we can we carry that, in some way. So I love hearing that, because I'm like, wow, I'm glad that anybody took that from a song that I wrote.
So what is yours? So I mean, it's interesting too, because once you put it out there, it's everybody's game to play. Everyone is interpreting it in their own way. I think the last time we talked about your last record too, I think it was the pandemic, and I remember listening to it, and I was picking up all these things, and you're like, okay, right. But what is Projection for you? What is the context regarding this song?
Well, yeah, I mean, that phenomenon that you and I discussed before, where sort of every song took on the complexion of the pandemic, is a phenomenon that music, and music not alone, but certainly music has a special way of reflecting back what you're feeling, whether that's the actual, whether that was the impetus behind the writing of the song or not. It just does it. And so in this song, for me anyway, as much as it's a sort of, just a song about what's in the heart and mind in that moment, there's certain lines in it that do sort of, in my mind now, sort of are attached to what we live today, which is this sort of undermining of what is real and what's not real. And this is something that we all deal with every day. What is fact and what's fiction? There are all these sort of cracks in the familiar, that things that we perhaps took for granted for a very long time, and now they're very much on the tips of everybody's tongue all the time. And so how do these feelings that could have happened to somebody 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, or 15, what do they mean in the context of today, given where the world is today, given what the relationship between human beings is right now, this sort of intense individuality, and then the distrust of anything other that comes with that. And where do these normal feelings about just being alive, where do they fit into this big bubbling cauldron of that is life today?
Wow. Well, that's going to be all wrapped into the 3.5 minute song, Projection.
I love it. I make these big statements, and people live, and they're like, yeah, that's a good pop song. It's like, it's one of the dangers of going through all this stuff. But it's just part of the act of reflection for me on it. But really, yeah, it's a song that just came from the heart.
No, it's beautiful. And I think that's the beautiful thing about getting the context, because of course we're all going to interpret it in our own way. But once you, often it's almost like when you look at liner notes, or when you read lyrics online and you get that context, when you take the tempo out, sometimes it can really shift your perspective. And it's a beautiful thing to know. So thank you for taking the time with us.
All right. That's a pleasure.
Okay, so now we're on to song 4. In my notes, I have "This Made Me Cry." Please tell me, where did I go wrong? Baby, I Need You. So Ben Blank, at this point, I mean, the instrumentation's really beautiful, but where are we at with Cascades?
Yeah. Cascades was a really hard song for me to finish. It started sort of, it started very simply, as so many songs do, just, sitting down at the piano and playing along and starting to hum melodies. And then at some point, when when you've sort of taken the music to a place, then you realize that you have to find the words that fit that, and that can be that's often the most difficult part of any song, or the songwriting process, is sort of, where does this actually take you emotionally, and how deep are you willing to go with that? And there's something about the music that just, the reason the song's called Cascades in a way is just because everything starts high and then falls down. There's like sort of water trickling down, from the top of a mountain, and eventually all that water joins together and becomes maybe more of a torrent, and ending in a waterfall. But this idea of sort of, life, we always feel like we're falling down, but then there's this moment of kind of like, you're pulled back up again, and you're pulled back to the top, and you find your legs, and you find your that strength that you need to sort of get back up. And sometimes they're not even sure how you got back up there, but then you're falling down again. And the song just sort of kept doing that, and just sort of just tumbling down. And so inevitably, for I guess, if we look at this through the eyes of our hero / anti-hero, it's on this journey of life and love that it's never going to be straightforward, and there's always going to be a struggle. It's just, what do you do with that struggle? How do you confront it? And in this case, it's just sort of let it all out, don't hold back at all what's inside you. And I think from a songwriting perspective, that's just something that's happened to me. It's like something shifted inside me now, where I've gone from sort of writing these topical songs about anything, war, politics, anything that was sort of out there that grabbed me, to basically just being able to write songs about, about feeling something and all the things that come with that.
Is it more rewarding to write from a vulnerable place?
It's funny you say that, because I remember we talked about vulnerability the last time, and it's like, is vulnerability a show of weakness, or is it admitting it? Is it a way of showing, sort of strength, and willing to sort of confront that? And I'm not even sure if rewarding is a word that I can use to describe it. It's more just like, it's the only thing that comes out now. It's just what it is. And, you're sort of, you have to obey what your songs are asking you to do. And I learned that the hard way on the last record, where I didn't do that. I didn't listen to what the songs were asking me to do. And I tried to write sort of from an older perspective, and it just kept bouncing off. So I could call that writer's block, but really what it was just sort of not seeing what I was being asked to do. And in this record, I just went straight into it, knowing that that's where I write songs from now. And maybe that'll change. Maybe I'll get to this sort of syrupy, sweet, everything's amazing place at some point, And again, I don't even want this to come across as this isn't doom and gloom. This is just life, and love has a huge part to play in that. And it's a beautiful, chaotic, swirling thing. And it's a really elusive but intriguing subject to write about, because it's never the same from one minute to the next.
I'm curious, because it sounds like you set out to start with melody, you're at the piano, or in different, in the creation of different songs. Do you have voice notes? Do you have those notebooks of lyrics, or are you always starting from the first step?
I used to have sort of an accumulation of sort of fragments for songs, and I would go back and like, oh, okay, that fits this. But I've run out of them, and they don't happen as often as they used to. So now I'm sitting down, with a notebook, but the notebook's blank, and again, maybe that's part of where this sort of character comes from, is this sort of idea that everything is just always feels like it's starting completely from scratch these days, that I'm not pulling on this reservoir anymore the way I used to. And it's just sort of like, okay, what the act of writing for me is like literally staring at a blank page now. So including writing the song lyrics, and taking your pencil and putting it on that blank notebook is one of the hardest things to do, because what is it going to mean? Is it just gibberish? And you have to get over that kind of self-consciousness of writing, not knowing where it's taking you, but also not knowing if it's going to be very good, and fighting through that.
Well, now I think it's also interesting to start talking about the blank page, Ben Blank. Ben Blank seems to have been kicking around since the 90s, perhaps peripherally in your mind. But now we are at this point where there is the blank page and the starting over, and Ben Blank being this kind of, medium to work through or work behind in some ways.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's a useful thing. It's a useful thing, to have, again, to have this character that you can sort of assign a lot of the things that you think and feel, and yet still make it feel like that person's on their own adventure in a way.
So here we are now. We're at song number 5, Picture of Love. Now there's a really huge tonal shift between Cascades and Picture of Love. We're kind of halfway through the album ish. So I kind of want to talk about sequencing. So this is the turning point, 5 out of 9 songs. Are we walking the fine line of Ben Blank here? Is this kind of, I can't tell if this is like the love song or the heartbreak song for Ben Blank.
It's kind of both. It's more just trying to paint like an honest picture that love is all of these things. And I was thinking about it the other day. So it's like when we were in kindergarten and we had to draw everything, because we didn't have the vocabulary to describe what we were thinking. And that's the idea behind what this song is when the words fail you, you sort of have to find a way to draw a picture in your mind. And so yeah, it's sort of a return in a way also to the beginning, where you realize that this is all just too complicated for you to describe, but we all kind of know the feeling behind it. And I was hoping that was one of the things that would resonate with people with this song. It's just that we know we know what these feelings are, and we all know that it defies being easily talked about. So in this case, what do we do? Well, we reach for some other means of describing it to the world around us. In this case, a picture.
If there was a picture of love, what would it look like?
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. It's in my case, it would definitely involve stick figures. So
nice. All right, let's get to Sam Roberts' band Picture of Love on Indie 88.
I drew a picture of love. I drew a picture of love for you. I drew a picture of love, 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 of love for you. Oh, I don't see colors anymore. So many changes in my life. So put back on and some my numbers in this picture.
So Afterlife. I love this song so much. It's an absolute jam. It kind of caught me off guard after Picture of Love, not gonna lie. But yeah, such a fan of this one. Have you played it live yet?
We have, yeah. We've played it live a few times, and it was, like any song you play for the first time live, there's this uncertainty, like whether you're going to actually be able to play the thing through from start to finish. I think the first time we played it live was in St. John, New Brunswick. It's called the Aerial 506 Festival. We played this summer. That was the first time we played it, and then we played it at Kitavalla, north of Toronto, which is kind of our annual ritual. So, and it was all right. And we're like, man, this feels good. So it's kind of like a regaining of confidence, I think this record is full of that. You're getting bashed around on all fronts, but then there's still a bit of that swagger and that sort of live for now, live in the moment.
Yeah, there's such energy to this one. And I was wondering too, first of all, this might be completely wrong, but for me, I was like, this is a driving tune, but there's also kind of like this Cars meets up with a quick Interpol riff thing. I'm not sure if that's the reference, but when I was listening, that's what I wrote in my notes.
Well, it is the reference now. Maybe it wasn't before, but for sure that works too. Yeah, no, it was weird how it could have been like that guitar riff can be played like more woolly, if that's a good word, like imagine like an older tennis ball where there's a lot of fluff on it, but for whatever reason, it just kept getting like tighter and tighter and tighter sounding. And then everything around it got tighter and tighter and tighter sounding until there's like absolutely no space between anything at all, which is kind of rare for us because we're a pretty woolly band in general, I would say, if I were to describe us.
A woolly band.
We're just a woolly old band, from the hair to the. I'm not now. I just cut my hair in the bathroom, and I'm like, man, that might have been a mistake. Some things you just never.
I cut my bangs this morning for this because now everything's content, and we're all on camera all the time.
We keep talking about experience. It's just some lessons come harder than others. Don't cut your own hair, kids. What else can I say? Yeah. So the song just kind of kept compressing to the point where there was just like became more airtight than anything that we've done in the studio.
I'm curious because you also have a bigger production role on this record in the studio as well, right? So what was that like for you?
I mean, it's sort of always been a part of what I do in terms of studio, because I don't go in with a sort of acoustic guitar riff and a couple of lines and then construct a song via production. I go in with a fully conceived song in terms of all the different parts and the arrangement and everything, and then leave it open to being reinterpreted. But in this case, I think a lot of the ideas that I'd recorded at home ended up sort of actually following through, the process. And we're like, well, that kind of still feels good, so let's just use that. But I mean, I don't want to fool anybody either. Like, this was very much a Gus Van Gogh production in terms of, all the expertise required to make a record. I'm still highly underqualified to do that.
And you were in Toronto you guys all came down to Toronto for this. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, it's kind of like Toronto's obviously a home away from home at this point, and a place that we're very, very familiar with. And so it felt like we're out there on a bit of an adventure and a mission, but at the same time, there was enough familiar to. And the problem, I guess, is that you have to keep the familiar at bay a little bit so that you can stay focused on the task at hand. But the way we did it this time was we'd just come down for a few days, we'd go sort of all out and then go home. To be quite honest with you, mainly because I hadn't finished writing most of the songs. I kind of came in.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is cool because it was always, everything was always urgent feeling. Everything was always very spontaneous feeling too. Like Afterlife, when we were recording that song, it had only been written a couple of days before, and it's kind of like throwing it out to the guys, and it's like,
okay, you know what? I lost a little bit of your audio. Can we go back to it was just written a few days before?
Yeah, Afterlife was just written a few days before, so I sent it out to the guys, and we kind of got our heads around how we were going to go about it in the recording studio. But there was that sense of spontaneity in this record that I really, really loved. There wasn't a song that felt sort of over considered. It doesn't mean that we didn't put in the time in the studio to really, fine tune everything. But there was the feeling that the song had literally only come to life 4 days before, and by Tuesday morning, you're now in the studio trying to make it into something good, and I love that process. It also kind of kept the pressure revving at a very high RPM for many months, because I'd come home and we'd book the studio time too. We'd say, okay, we've got studio time booked in 2.5 weeks, so I'd be down here literally in this room just kind of getting these songs, which the songs had been sitting there and just cycling like a washing machine for so long. And I was so glad to be put under the gun to get them finished, and then next thing we'd be back in with Gus. He'd be off making a metric record for 2 weeks, and then he'd come in and he'd have to switch hats to our record. And so yeah, it was frantic, but in a good way.
I wanted to talk, I know we've talked a lot about Afterlife as well, but there's a ton of energy on this track, but I'm don't talk to me about the afterlife. I was curious, that's a great line, but do you find at this point in life and in your career with your bandmates, you've been together for so long, are you more focused about not wasting time? because you have this, you're at this point in your career where you're great. You're doing well. You've got legions of fans. You have this consistent release schedule. You know what I mean? There's lots going on. But at this point as well, the flip side is, are you like, let's be very aware of what time we have.
I don't think we've ever felt comfortable as a band. I don't mean sort of in terms of who we are or our, in our skin, so to speak, but definitely in terms of our foothold. And that can be a scary place to be, but it's also a very valuable sort of fire that's lit and relit and burns quite hot in us, in that you can't ever rest. And to be honest with you, I don't think we can rest on our laurels. And I'm not just saying that as sort of fluff. I actually don't think we can. I think we have to keep putting out new music for us to stay emotionally sort of attached to what we're doing, because that's what this way of life requires of you. I think if we were just in this sort of sunset phase of this band, it would be over very quickly for all of us. I don't think we could do it. Maybe out of necessity, but I don't think there would be the passion that we feel for it now. But the reason we still do feel passionate is because we do think constantly about what the next thing is going to be. Even when it's foggy and unclear, our gaze very quickly is focused on what's around the next corner, and we don't look back very much at all.
That's good to know. I like the idea of the forward motion, which is really hard for a lot of folks. It's hard for me. I'm always looking back.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of something that we're built to do, I guess, without knowing why. Maybe there are people who've studied, I'm sure there are people who've studied this, spend over a lifetime, but I find it a very interesting thing that we're sort of hardwired for nostalgia. And when you're trying to create something, whether it's music or art or anything, you have to be able to manage that tendency and to be able to sort of redirect your energy, because nostalgia is like it's a very powerful state. It's very intoxicating, but it also saps a lot of your will and energy away from the future. And I think you have to sort of almost train yourself to keep looking forward.
Absolutely. You're motivating me, Sam. I'm getting like life note interview. You're gonna have to listen back and be like, bring it to my therapist. I love it.
Don't talk to me about the afterlife. Don't talk to me about the afterlife.
Okay, so here we are. We're at song number 7 now. Everybody Needs Love. There's kind of a childlike essence to this as well. It's the sweetest song. You also mentioned your kids. Have you ever done that before?
I don't know. I don't know if I have. Yeah, I did once. There's a song called Lions of the Kalahari. It's on our a record called Love at the End of the World. I think that might be the only time I reference my baby. It's like the lines, like the first time I heard my baby cry, that was, I think, maybe the only other time that I've ever referenced my kids.
So let's talk about this one. What's the context around? I mean, it's the beautiful sentiment. Everybody needs love.
I think that's it. I mean, that is the context. It's one of those it's one of those statements that you don't want to be sort of interpreted in terms of what it is. It's just that an acknowledgement that this is something that we all need. It can be lacking. The pursuit of it can be difficult, but it's also hopefully encouraging people just to reach out to people who are around you and show them how you feel about them, because we all need it, no matter how solid the ground underneath our feet might seem. There isn't one of us who doesn't need that feeling in their life.
Was this a song that came together really quickly?
Yeah, this is probably the one where the words sort of came, it's always like the words came tumbling out. That doesn't happen to me very often. But this song, for whatever reason, it did. And maybe it is because of the simplicity of the message, and that it's easy to be sort of more autobiographical in that context too. You're not trying to cloak anything in metaphor or, dreams or anything. It's just a sort of it's all out there, sort of laid out on the table. And there's something about the music itself too that has a sort of kind of sad but exuberant quality to it that made me want to write the words, and or made it so that I didn't have to dig too deep to find them. And I was actually with our guitar player Dave Nugent trying to prepare for our party next, coming up with you guys, and trying to figure out how to play all these songs acoustically, and sort of going through that process of not reinvention, but just sort of trying to uncover like how can we represent this a different way. And then we started playing that song. I was like, oh, well, this one's already done for us. And it was a really nice feeling. It just kind of has this very natural feeling that's easy to sort of tap into what it's all about for me.
Amazing. Can I ask, and I'm often, when I bring people bring up their children or their mention, I want to be respectful of the fact, but I'm also curious. So I don't know if I'm crossing any boundaries here, but I'm curious about what they thought when they heard it.
I don't know if they have heard it yet.
Oh, okay.
They listen to Drake.
Okay. They don't care their dad, Sam Roberts.
No,
gotcha.
Definitely not. They listen to SZA.
That's that.
And Drake and The Weeknd. And so they haven't heard it, and I'm kind of waiting to see what their reaction is going to be when even from my family. This was the kind of record where I really wanted it to be finished before anybody heard any of it, because I do feel, and in releasing some of the songs sort of piecemeal the way that we do, it's just part of that's been a difficult part of the process for me, because it's sort of, you're separated, it's like projection. Well, in my mind, projection is the song that has to come out after I Dream of You. It's just sort of, they're bound together, not necessarily in the storyline, like you won't understand the song if you hear it, but it's something that I hope that people listen to from start to finish. So even with my own family members, I'm like, no, this record has to be done before you sit there, if they sit there. And now we got to compete against Drake's new record. So I got to have to wait for that to kind of come and go before they even give me a shot,
And so when it comes to sequencing, did you it sounds like you didn't write these songs in order necessarily. What was that process like then with the story you're trying to tell with Ben Blank?
Well, I had a lot of practice with writing set lists every day, and I think definitely to the crew, but also to my bandmates' chagrin, it's something that I insist on doing for every show, instead of just having like 3 set lists and you're like, okay, are we playing A, B, or C today? It's every night it's different, because there's always a song. It's like, no, that felt wrong after this one, or I want to pull this old one out of the vault and put this one, and that's going to kick that one out of off the team. And so it becomes a sort of, house of cards or domino effect thing. And so I take that same process into the track listing. And I really do. I think what it is more than anything is I'm trying to make sure that every song has its time to be itself. And I think what gives it the best, if you put a song, that's sort of like a sort of slower mid-tempo song after a banger like that, sometimes that mid-tempo song doesn't get its full point across, kind of thing. You can put a really quiet, introspective, slow song after a banger, but so it's like this, it's building this whole thing more than building the story of like, okay, what's this character? In this case, we have a character, am I trying to actually sort of tell like a linear story? Not so much, but am I trying to give each song its place where it does what it's supposed to do to the person listening to it? Then very much so.
Interesting. I like that. Because I knew that there was this character. I didn't know if this concept, when I listened through, there are many stories being told, but I didn't know if I was missing out with the linear tale.
No, I think, you can find that. I've tried to find it myself, and I'm like, okay, I mean, you can, and that's part of it too. And maybe that tale will be different. Your first listen, hopefully, Lana, you're going to listen to it 20 times at least over the course of your life,
Of course.
So let's just say that
for sure.
maybe
I've already listened to
not,
Picture of Love like at least 300
okay,
times.
well that
Play it all the
counts.
time, by the way. So
That counts, and thank you for that.
I know all the words. Love it.
Okay, amazing. Well, and hopefully listen number 18 means something different than listen number 3. I also want that. I hate it when things. It's kind of like in the Lego movie at the end when the character sort of glues all the Lego together because they don't want to. Is that a crazy reference? I don't know.
Like it's not in my reference library perfectly necessarily.
Well, the dad glues
the
dad glues the Lego together, whereas Lego's supposed to be this free expression, like it's supposed to be changed. It's supposed to be, but he glues his Lego together so that it's always perfect. And so I don't want my records to feel like glued together Lego. Like you finish the thing, you finish the spaceship, then you glue it together and it can't be changed. I want it to feel like, things are constantly kind of moving around in it.
Yeah, records are like friends. They grow with you.
Okay.
I
can't believe the Lego reference is, out there now. I can't do anything about it.
I'm sure a lot of people will understand.
Okay, good.
I just happen to sadly, now I will have to watch the Lego movie. So
I think you might have to,
yeah. So, okay, we are now at song number 8, Bad Country. It's called a honky-tonk dive bar anthem. I'm not sure, because we were talking references of Lego movie. Did you ever watch Justified?
I didn't know, but I watched Deadwood.
Okay, I didn't. Well, there's this character, Raylan Givens, and he's this kind of good guy, but he also bends the rules a bit for the bad guys because he sees the good in them. Anyway, this reminded me of that. So, anyways, the reference fell flat. But let's talk about this this honky tonk anthem. Where are we with Ben Blank here?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the idea. I think it's important in sort of, especially in a sort of cowboy world, that you sort of paint the landscape in some way, because it's always such a visual thing for me. This idea of desert-scapes and cactus and cattle skull line collecting, in this case a human skull, but clearly sort of moving through this menacing landscape. But what I thought when I was writing is it was strange that I couldn't stay focused on this desertscape, that I actually thought of like more. I kept going to an urban setting, and this sort of the tension that exists in the urban world that we live in today. And I live in Montreal, sort of very urban place, and all the different sort of realities that exist in that. And no matter how much I tried to sort of stay focused on this, the cowboy vista, in my mind, the video, if I haven't made a video for this, but if I made a video for this song, it would take place in a city, and sort of try to just, without judgment, trying to show as clear a picture of what it means to live in a city today.
Are you often, when you're writing lyrics, are you writing them through a really like visual lens?
Yeah, it can be. I would say there's very often a sort of small movie taking place in behind it all, for sure. And it's helpful kind of as a tool. I've never described it that way, but maybe it is a tool, because you can kind of go back to that movie and you can press pause and play and rewind and all of that and say like, okay, where am I in that again? It's like, oh yeah, we've dealt with the heartbreak. Now we're on we're on to redemption or whatever it is. And then you can kind of like keep working through that movie. And because it can be easy to sort of lose track of, okay, where was I in this song? And especially when songs take years to write, as they very often do. So to have that little movie, that visual sort of representation, and that's why it's always jarring when you actually make a music video and you sort of, in my case, I always give that control over to a video director who has their own vision. So it's always kind of a hard moment to kind of let go of my own movie in favor of somebody else's thing.
No doubt. Now I'm curious about when, like, has Bad Country been kicking around for a while, or is this one of the later songs to be created for the record?
It was the latest. It was the last song to be written, but the riff is probably the oldest. I think the riff was something that I wanted to be on Chemical City. So it's going back quite a long ways. That's back in 2000. We made that record in 2004. So the riff itself has sort of existed for quite some time. And it was weird because it kind of was attached to that record, this song that I'd never written. When I was writing the song, all the different elements from that particular record started finding their way back into this one. And it's, in my mind, it's like a little tiny piece of an unfinished part of Chemical City that found its way into this new record.
If you were to tell me, and so I can maybe listen back with different ears, what kind of elements from Chemical City are we talking about?
Well, sort of the like that juxtaposition again of a kind of, I guess you'd call it like a folky riff, but with very like a rhythmic juxtaposition that isn't really quite what you think the riff is asking for. And that was sort of a songwriting thing that I was trying a lot in those days. A song like Bridge to Nowhere, it just, from that record, it was just sort of having this rhythm that could have been any kind of folky thing, but doing something really, really sort of rhythmic over the top of it. And this song kind of asked for the same thing, had the same requirements.
I'm wondering now if you have a riff vault, if there's the Sam Roberts riff vault.
There is
like Pro Tools, folder where it's
there. It's there. I call it Futures. It's a folder on my thing called Futures, and it can be, and sometimes it's just this. I have no idea what the riff is actually supposed to be. It's just something I recorded, either, through a in the old days, through like literally a tape dictaphone or into a voicemail thing on my home phone, and then eventually now got, actual voice memo stuff. And it's just this complete chaotic mess of unfinished bits of songs. And once in a while, I'll just go back and I'll sift through them. I'll be like, oh yeah, that one. Okay, maybe let's see if that does anything today. And more often than not, it does nothing for me. And I'll try to do something completely new. But once in a while, like with Bad Country, be like, oh, that's what this is. This needs to be on this record. And then I'll put the time in to kind of flush out the song. Amazing.
Well, thank you so much for all of this. I mean, we're now at song 9. We're at the last track.
I know. I mean, I feel like, it feels like an adventure in and of itself, just talking about it. And I haven't had that much practice either. Just, making music is such a, I guess you can call it instinctual in a lot of ways when you've done it enough and when it's part of your way of life. But talking about it is another thing. Like actually talking about these songs and going in there and rooting around, and then for the meanings behind them, or even the stories that were involved in making them, or how you feel about them more than anything, takes its own kind of practice like this. So thanks.
Well, I really appreciate you doing this with me. And of course, I'm not a musician, but I am always picking things in my brain and going with references and trying to kind of unearth different contexts. So I appreciate you.
I love it, Letta. Thank you.
Well, for If Only, are you ready for this one? I call it the Patsy Cline, Buddy Holly song, and I imagine them slow dancing on the porch.
Yeah,
there's like that 50s vibe, the guitar, the harmonies, and I was wondering, you also kind of, I heard You Can Keep the Ring, and I was like, you can't end with a breakup song, Sam. What are you doing? So let's talk about this.
I know. I thought I really did, like when you're talking about track listing and all that stuff, it's like, can you do that? Can you do that to the listener where you go out on a breakup song? But there was just something, it was more about sonically and musically, and this idea of sort of drifting off into the dark. I just felt that regardless of whether there was triumph or heartbreak attached to that was just the state of mind. The state of mind was more important than the fact that there might be a cataclysmic rift happening in the song, but You're right. That's a really, that was a call. That was a call to make that, and we'll see how people feel about that and when the record comes out. But I mean, again, it's life too. It's also, it's life. It doesn't have to be, maybe it isn't, maybe it shouldn't be qualified as a happy or an unhappy ending. Maybe it's just like, it's not an ending at all. It's, you keep going, drift out there into the dark and see what else happens to you.
I mean, I was thinking this is the song that Ben Blank, would walk out into the sunset with, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's gone.
No. I mean, are you asking if there's a sequel? Because I don't know. It took me a lot to...
I mean, when it ended with If Only, again, I thought there's the tone of Afterlife that returns as well. And I don't know is it tremolo? Is it that resonating?
Yeah, there's definitely that sort of, tremolo guitar. And it's, when you're talking about the that sort of harkening back to that 1950s feel of a country ballad, like a Patsy Cline song. I don't have that vocabulary down in terms of the music, which is always, I kind of find an interesting place to, because if I did, I would just do exactly that. There'd be like crazy, beautiful slide guitar all over this, and it would just be, 7-part harmonies. But I don't, that's not in my toolbox, so to speak. So it's always sort of like, what would I do if I, when I'm writing a song like that, it's like, what does my version of that sound like in its limited way? And so again, you end up having this sort of unforeseen result, mainly because I can't write a song that's that complete in this sort of grand old Opry Nashville style of the day. So it's always going to sound a little bit like us trying to do that, but never quite getting there, but hopefully making something beautiful anyway.
But this is a Sam Roberts record. That's
it. It's sort of like, and as always, your limitations become your best assets in a way, because you'll end up doing your thing because you can't do anything else. You can try. Well, it's the trying is where the interesting things happen. It's like, okay, I'm going to try to write a 50s style country ballad and let's just see what happens. But like you say, I think this song I feel like the record is going out with, a question that doesn't necessarily have an answer, which means that, it's like, it's not over. It's not over. It's never over.
Well, before we wrap, of course, I'm kind of curious as to, is this, considering earlier you mentioned it for people who may have tuned in a bit later, that you basically would write a batch of songs, go record them, go back home, write more, get back into the studio. Does that mean that there were only 9 songs that were part of these sessions, or are there other songs? Oh, okay.
No, there are none, no others. Again, the seeds might exist in that sort of futures folder. I don't know what it depends. I did really enjoy sort of working with this kind of these types of songs and this sort of palette of colors and seeing what I could do with them. And I definitely think it's a place that I'd like to go back to, as from a songwriting perspective, and whether that's sort of a continuation of this kind of character driven narrative, or if it's something completely different. I did really like sort of dabbling in this kind of music.
Well, it's a fantastic record, and we're so excited to play it in its entirety. And thank you for helping us.
Yeah, thanks to you and everybody out there for giving us this time and giving the record a proper sort of introduction to the world. So it's much appreciated.
Well, thank you so much. And congratulations again.
Thank you, Lana.